It is Election Day, and we are now joined by Anthony Scaramucci, SkyBridge Capital founder and co-managing partner. Also this morning, Vivek Ramaswamy, Strive Asset Management co-founder, of course, a former presidential candidate as well. Good morning to both of you, gentlemen, as we get set for the final day of this election, and voting is now, of course, underway in parts of the country. This is maybe the final debate, and what I'm hoping we can do is have a conversation and maybe a debate from an economic and business perspective. You can take it however you want. But, Anthony, I will start with you to make your final case for your candidate, and then, Vivek, we'll come back to you.
Well, listen, I'll make a simple case for the vice president. It's about deficit reduction. It's about expanding the opportunities for the middle class. It's about expanding the opportunities for smaller businesses. And it's about getting the immigration story for the United States correct, among many other things. And one thing that perhaps Vivek and I will disagree with is the nature of the U.S. alliances around the world. I happen to think that we're better together. I know the former president doesn't love these multilateral deals. But if you look over the last 80 years, Andrew, those types of multilateral deals have led to great peace and great global prosperity and, an 85,000 per capita U.S. economy. So those are things I'd like to keep intact, and those are things that we're going to be working very hard for come January 2025.
Vivek?
Look, I judge based on results, and this is a unique election where you get to compare two administrations side by side. The last time the United States had that chance was over a century ago, so it makes this a unique election. Let's compare Biden-Harris versus the 4 years under Trump. Under Biden-Harris, inflation was up, real wages are down. Under Biden-Harris, you had actually inequality went up. The Gini coefficient was higher. Home ownership was down by a lot. Illegal immigration was up. Our national spirit was down. Foreign conflicts were up, wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine, while military recruitment was down. So I judge not based on words, but based on actions. And I think that if you look at Donald Trump's vision for this country, he's going to unite the country not necessarily through fake verbiage, but through his actions. Success is unifying. Excellence is unifying. And especially for a financially minded audience, and Tony and I both share that in common, is that we're familiar with capital markets. I think if you're a single issue voter on the following alone, this would be a case for Donald Trump: the tax on unrealized capital gains. That would require potentially millions of Americans to be able to write a check with cash they don't actually have to pay taxes on assets that the government says is worth a certain amount. That is a formula for a stock market crash and a second Great Depression. Kamala Harris continues to stand by it. And so for a financially minded audience, if you care about capital markets, that alone is a strong case for voting for Donald Trump. But the stronger case is the record that I laid out. And the beautiful part of this is that people get to vote for, the candidate they want. That's American democracy at its best. And I think today's a special day in that regard.
Vivek, before I go back to Anthony, just to clarify one piece. My understanding, and maybe it's wrong, is that on the issue of unrealized gains, we're talking about folks who make more than $100 million. Is that accurate?
I want to say two things about that. First is that's what the Harris campaign has stated. Two parts of that is, first of all, there's never been a tax that started with the plus $100 million category that didn't have implications and a trickle-down effect down below. But, Andrew, and you understand this well, the trickle-down effect, even from the stock market losses from somebody who has over $100 million, selling and creating a cycle of forced selling. You're talking about Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who have paper gains for a private company, but they actually have to then sell those stakes. Creates a cycle of forced selling that in the end hurts the people who are on the bottom the most as well. So, yes, Harris has been very careful to cabin the scope of this. Right. But I think the effect of it, nonetheless, even if it's implemented at that level, is going to hurt everybody all the way down. And I do think if you're a single issue voter on just the stock market and the economy, that alone should be a basis for voting for Donald Trump.
Anthony, I want you to react to that, but I also want to ask you one other question, which is, do you think that you are affirmatively voting for the vice president, or do you think that you are voting against former President Trump, who was, of course, your former employer?
Well, listen, I think the former president's a disaster, and I disagree with Vivek respectfully. He's not a uniter. He's an incredible divider. Just the way he talks about non-white immigrants in the United States with the language that people used in the 1930s in Germany is an example of the division. So Certainly wouldn't vote for him, but I am voting for her because what Vivek's leaving out is the stock market's at an all-time high. We have great economic growth. The unemployment numbers are around 4%, and the economy's doing quite well after COVID. Vivek's mentioning the inflation. We probably don't have enough time on television, but I'm not a political candidate. I actually understand that the inflation was secular and that you can't personalize it. You can't personalize it onto Donald Trump when he sent trillions of dollars into the economy to try to protect people during COVID, and you can't personalize it onto the vice president or the president. Moreover, if you're judging the inflation, we did better than the rest of the world, and our economy recovered faster than the rest of the world. When Vivek's talking about the unrealized capital gains, he's trying to drop a bomb on your viewers, and I understand why he's doing that. But then I could drop another bomb where President Trump is talking about eliminating the independence of the Federal Reserve, and then I could spend 5 minutes on the catastrophic consequences of that. You know, we have the most liquid, deepest capital markets in the world. And if Trump wants to make this like Turkey, that would be an unmitigated disaster. So we both know that's not going to happen. And we know that the unrealized capital gains talk is also not going to happen. But what could happen under Donald Trump is that he deports people. He's talking about deporting 15 million people. It's probably not possible, but a 1.8 million deportation would cost the taxpayers $88 billion, would crush our GDP, and would crush our tax revenue. So let's talk about the realistic things that are going to happen. That's something that's very realistic that the president talks about all the time, and so does his people.
Hey, Vivek, I'll respond to that, but let me ask you one other question, which is,
Sure.
We've talked a lot about tariffs over the past couple of months. Talked about oil maybe being an offset to whatever inflation could come from the tariffs. But we also saw Elon Musk over the past week say that there would be a temporary hardship in a Trump administration because of the transition costs. He says it'll be better on the other side, but for some period of time, I don't know if we're talking about a year, 2 or 3 or more, that it would be hard. And I'm curious if you would comment on that, because I do think that economists, at least the majority of them, you may disagree with the majority of them, but suggest that that would be the case.
Well, a couple things I want to say briefly to address that, and then I want to go back to a couple of Anthony's comments. On the issue of tariffs, Biden preserved all of the Trump tariffs, so in that sense, that's a wash. Elon Musk's comments were, I think, being very honest with respect to regulatory reform and thinning out a lot of the federal bureaucracy. If you're talking about thinning out that bureaucracy, are there going to be some short-term bumps in the road? Of course. Is that itself going to be good for the economy, even in the short, medium, and long run? Absolutely it is. I think we have a regulatory state that has overgrown like a cancer. The Supreme Court has actually shot down a lot of those regulations. That's the single greatest economic stimulus that's lasting, is rolling back a lot of those unconstitutional regulations, with Donald Trump favors and Kamala Harris does not. But I want to go back to, I think, an interesting point about this debate on the tax on unrealized capital gains embodies the entire Harris policy vision, which is that her signature economic policy proposal. You ask some of the smartest minds, and I respect Anthony and his proximity to capital markets, and other people like Mark Cuban have made similar arguments. The strongest defense they can offer against her signature economic policy proposal is that it's not going to happen. And I think that should tell you a lot about the seriousness of her plans. If the whole point is to say that we're going to put this idea out there, but the public shouldn't believe it, I think that there's either it's a bad policy and you shouldn't vote for her because it's a bad policy, or she doesn't mean the policy she stands for and you shouldn't vote for her because she's not a serious
but Vivek,
candidate.
One
point, and I'm just curious about it because I'm looking at a Bloomberg story here.
Go to the Fed, though, Andrew.
Harris goes quiet on Biden's push to tax unrealized gains. I have not heard her actively suggest, and I don't know if there's verbiage where you've seen her talk specifically about this unrealized gains plan.